This is the latest high-profile case of sexual violence against women in India. It comes almost 2 years after a fatal gang rape on a Delhi bus that sparked mass protests. The government is often accused of not doing enough to keep women safe. So what can be done? Devineni is the curator and writer of Priya's Shakti. It's a new comic book with a female rape survivor as its superhero and aims to focus attention on the problem of sexual violence in India. Ram joins me now from our New York bureau. Ram, a very upsetting situation with Uber. I mean, really puts focus on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. I was in Delhi 2 years ago when that horrible rape happened on the bus, and I was involved in a lot of the protests, and that's sort of where the impetus of this whole project started from, because we're trying to challenge these patriarchal views. A lot of the problems that sort of is an underlying problem of rape in India is based on these patriarchal views. I'll tell you just a very quick story. When I was involved in those protests, I spoke to a Delhi police officer and asked him what he thought about what was happening in India during that time. And he said something which was very shocking and maybe indicative. He said, most likely, he said, no good girl walks home alone at night, which to me means she probably deserved it. And I realized at that moment that the problem of sexual violence in India is not a legal issue, but a cultural problem. So that's where this sort of comic book comes from, is trying to deal with it from that angle.
As you say, Ram, there's a real social stigma associated to rape, and it's usually the victim who's viewed with suspicion.
Yes, I mean, I've spoken and interviewed several rape survivors, gang rape survivors, and a lot of them, it's very difficult for them to get justice. Not necessarily because it's legally, it's difficult. Problem is their families, their community, even the police sort of discourage it. I spoke with one rape survivor, and while interviewing her, there was a police officer who was guarding her. He had a semi-automatic machine gun. And now just imagine a 16-year-old girl having to spend the rest of her life fearing for her life. What incentive is there for her to seek justice? And I think, it creates this kind of culture and impunity among men to commit more rape. So what this comic book tries to do is to create empathy, understanding, and really challenge those underlying patriarchal views that are causing these problems.
And why did you choose Hindu mythology to make your point?
Well, growing up, studying and learning Hindu mythology from my family and from other comic books, very common thing is regular people, villagers, would often call on the Hindu gods for help. And they would come in and intervene and on their behalf try to help them out. So it's a very typical motif. And Hinduism, at its core essence, is all about conquering fear. And that's what our character Priya, who is the rape survivor in this comic book, does at the very end. And more importantly, starts a movement and challenges people to attack those patriarchal views.
Do you think your comic will make a difference?
Well, I hope so. I mean, what I honestly would hope is that Priya and the character of Priya, and more importantly, rape survivors, get the support and the structure behind them. I mean, honestly, I would prefer in the end, no one even knows that I created the comic book. I think the message of Priya and what she stands for is more important than me, the comic book, or any other creator involved.
Okay, Ram, thanks very much for joining us here on Impact.